Well, we meet again. I hope everybody is having a wonderful week. Well, so this was supposed to be posted on Tuesday. It's coming out on Wednesday. So I said, I hope everybody had a good weekend and start to their week. But, anyways, first of all, today I have to issue a public apology to my younger brother and younger brothers everywhere. They are, in fact, not the worst. So yesterday I came home to Quinn, my younger brother, vacuuming my room without me ever even asking. He even used that little hose thingy to get like the creases by the floor and the walls and all that good stuff. All I did was hide in the corner, move stuff out of the way, and smoke out of my Rick and Morty bong, which I promise was a gift, okay? You have to believe me. So, funny thing, as I was starting to write this episode, I came in fully intent on doing yet another obscure German serial killer that hasn't gotten too much cover. And don't worry, I have no plans on slowing down that train whatsoever. But in trying to find, let's say, a quirky, fresh way to start this podcast, I Googled this day in history just to see what might be out there, hoping for a fun fact or, I don't know, anything. And as it turns out, I kind of hit the true crime jackpot. So, like I said, I'm a few days late on this. 33 years ago, on August 28th, which was the day I was writing it, the final two victims of the Gainesville Ripper were found, marking an end to a 4-day-long spree of killing that had terrorized an entire campus and the surrounding community. Now, I'm sure most of you recognize this killer's nickname, the Gainesville Ripper, and I know the story has been told countless times, but I think it's important to remember the victims of these heinous acts even decades later, 33 years later. I'm sure, oops, that's the same paragraph. Plus, I kind of want to break this bad habit of remembering all of the terrible murderers and their names, but I seldom remember the people whom they brutally killed. Like, honestly, off the top of my head, without going back to the article, I could not tell you the names of his victims, and that's no bueno. So I will be better, I promise. Pinky swear. Honestly, I'm probably just going to dive head into this if you don't mind. It's quite an awful story and very reminiscent of the recent Idaho college murders, which hurts that much more. Plus, it's kind of your typical serial killer story, like from beginning to end, and in the worst way possible. My sources today come from Wikipedia, per usual, the always fabulous website, All Things Interesting, and then, unexpectedly, the History Channel. Danny Rolling, aka the Gainesville Ripper, was essentially fucked from day one. I'm not sure he stood any chance of a normal life. That being said, I don't think anyone could have seen what was to come. Born in May of 1954 in Shreveport, Louisiana, to Claudia and James Rolling, excuse me, Danny had only reached his first birthday when he received his first beating. That seems appropriate, right? Baby's first birthday beating. I'd put that on a pillow. And the reason for this, he wasn't crawling. Oof, this might be a tough one today. He wasn't crawling quite properly. Like, what kind of father? He expects his 1-year-old, and what is a proper crawl? That same year, his brother was born and the abuse continued. If anything, it had worsened. I will give it to his mother, though. Claudia did try to escape this abusive relationship a few times, but we all know how difficult that really is. Not to mention it was the 50s, so basically impossible. And this is The first time we see Danny exhibit his father's, let's say, abusive tendencies is in 3rd grade. According to the All Things Interesting article, quote, when Danny failed the 3rd grade for too many absences due to illness, his mother had a nervous breakdown. Danny's school's counselors described him as suffering from an inferiority complex with aggressive tendencies and poor impulse control, end quote. And this behavior, to many people, is foreshadowing essentially for the rest of his life. By 11, nothing had improved. His father, who, might I mention, is a police officer, continued his regularly scheduled family abuse. And this would eventually push his wife and himself completely over the edge. Quote, his mother was committed to a hospital after she had slit her own wrist. Danny then picked up drugs and alcohol, which only worsened his already fragile mental state, end quote. During his drug-induced teen years, Danny did pick up a few not totally horrible habits. For example, he tried his best to go to church every Sunday, and he even started playing music as a coping mechanism for all the abuse he endured. Although during this prosperous, you could say, time, he was caught peeping into a young girl's room at some point, which is definitely not as cool. Then, as soon as he could, our boy Danny here enlisted in the Air Force. Many people can find solace and purpose and a proper life in the military. This, however, was not the case for Danny. His rampant drug problem only increased. After taking acid on over 100 separate occasions, the Air Force finally discharged him. At age 19, somehow, Danny ended up marrying a woman and began a, you could say, normal life, at least for a bit, it had seemed. At age 23, after being with his wife for 4 years, she finally separated from him after he threatened to kill her. This was in 1977. Quote, Danny turned his devastation into anger and raped a woman who closely resembled his ex-wife. Later that year, he killed the woman in a car accident, which troubled him even further, end quote. Like, he really let himself go all at once. I feel he must have just been bubbling at the surface, trying to appear as a normal human being for 4 years at that point, going completely insane, when we know he's clearly a monster already. And as to how he got out of this car accident, manslaughter, scot-free, I honestly have no idea. There wasn't really any elaboration on that, at least that I could tell. The next 12 years are closely recorded, but not closely recorded, it feels like. Danny continued this terrible behavior and was in and out of jail many times for theft and other petty crimes. That part is well documented. But the part that confuses me is this. How can this guy backtrack from rape and manslaughter and only then commit non-felonies for the most part, just like theft and the petty crimes? That seems a little bit funky to me. In 1989, Shreveport, Louisiana, 3 family members were found murdered inside their house. Quote, 55-year-old Tom Grissom, his 24-year-old daughter Julie, and his 8-year-old grandson Sean. The family had been attacked in their home as they were preparing for dinner. Afterward, Julie's body had been mutilated, cleaned, and posed, end quote. Absolutely horrifying. And this case remained unsolved for some time. And it's not unrelated, I promise. 1989, the year that happened, also happens to be the year that 1, Danny was fired from his last job. 2, the same year he attempted to murder his father, which I'm actually not that mad about. And 3, the same year he decided to up and move to Florida under a fake identity. He just bum rushed his way out of Shreveport, set up shop in Florida. So obviously something smells fishy to me. The bus he took from to Florida from Louisiana. It dropped him off in Sarasota, which is about 180 miles north of Gainesville. And for whatever reason, this is where Danny headed. On August 24th, 1990, the first of 5 horrific, absolutely dreadful murders took place. Quote, Danny broke into the home of Sanja Larson and Christina Powell, both incoming freshmen at the University of Florida in Gainesville. Danny followed them home, broke into their house, and simply overpowered them. Thus began the streak of the Gainesville Ripper, end quote. I won't get into the specific details of their gruesome assault while still alive or the subsequent assault after their death, but it is worth noting his mutilation of the bodies, unfortunately. Quote, Rowling went as far as to cut one of the girl's nipples and to cut one of the girl's nipples off and keep one as a grisly trophy of his actions, end quote. And I promise that's important to the story, otherwise we wouldn't be talking about it. Before news of this first double murder had spread throughout campus and the community, the Gainesville Ripper would strike again. And just a heads up, no pun intended, this scene is even worse. Quote, the next day, Danny killed Krista Hoyt in much the same fashion. He broke into her residence, and after he raped her, he removed her nipples and placed them beside her. Danny then cut off her head and sat her upright on the edge of the bed. The Gainesville Ripper then put her head on a bookshelf. End quote. First of all, gross. That's terrible. But what's the point of all this post-mortem positioning of the victims? I understand taking this weird, messed up trophy, in a sense, but why does he have to do this to the bodies if you're just going to leave afterwards? There's probably some very specific sciencey answer to this question that would provide me no comfort. Anyways, by the time Krista was discovered, the frenzy had begun, and rightfully so. I mean, I would be shitting bricks myself if I was on campus at that time. Students were sleeping in groups, adding extra locks to their doors, not even daring to walk alone during the day or night, and even the college offered free temporary housing for those who didn't feel safe where they had currently lived. Despite the students taking essentially every precaution available to them except for leaving college, this animal managed to kill one more time. Quote, on August 27th, Danny attacked Tracy Paulus and Manuel Taboda, both 23 years old. He killed Manuel while he slept, then he killed Tracy. Authorities feel Danny did not manage to mutilate these bodies because he may have been in danger of getting caught or was otherwise interrupted. End quote. Let me remind you, these 5 murders occurred in a span of 4 days and all within 2 miles of each other. I mean, I don't want to. It would be terrible, but I kind of wish I could put myself in the headspace of those students at the time. I can't even imagine how long and terrifying that week must have felt. It just gives me the shivers thinking about it. The following week, all classes were canceled and hundreds of students returned home, many of them never coming back. I mean, who could blame them? That is goddamn traumatizing. According to, here we go, the History Channel, quote, while the first murders spawned a massive investigation, including 75 state and federal agents, Florida's governor sent an additional 50 state troopers and investigators to assist after the bodies of Paulus and Taboda were found, end quote. So they've got hundreds of people working on this case. And yet, like with many investigations we see, it went cold almost immediately. As an abuser himself, plus the son of a police officer / abuser, Danny had at least the minimal set of skills required to keep investigators at bay. After the murders, he would dispose of any tools, tape, or rope that he had used. Plus, he would sanitize the bodies after the sexual assault to rid them of any bodily fluid or DNA that may be on them. Scumbag, sure, but not a total doorknob. This nothingness of the case continued for months, despite the extensive efforts. And to how the case actually gets solved, it's kind of something straight out of a movie. So, quote, the case was finally cracked when investigators found an abandoned campsite around the campus with a cassette recorded by the killer, admitting to the murders. Surrounding evidence eventually led police to Danny Rolling, who had been arrested in Ocala, Florida, for armed robbery, end quote. So, like, that's some creepy shit you would see in, like, the Blair Witch Project. I absolutely hate the idea of a hidden murderer's campsite. Ew. Then, as these killings were continued to get national media coverage, Shreveport investigators, we go back to Shreveport, they reached out to Florida officers. You see, they had noticed almost immediately the similarities between the Gainesville Ripper and that family triple homicide. Enough DNA evidence had been collected between the multiple murder scenes that police were able to conclude that the Gainesville killings were in fact done by the same Shreveport killer, but it wasn't enough to convict on. That didn't matter though, because before long, Danny Rolling confessed to being the Gainesville Ripper and taking the lives of 5 innocent college students. 5 in 4 friggin' days. After his confessions, quote, prosecutors found enough evidence to convict him, and he was subsequently executed on October 25th, 2006 in Florida. A total of 47 people witnessed the execution of the Gainesville Ripper, which is double the capacity of the viewing room. Rolling's last meal consisted of a lobster tail served with drawn butter, butterfly shrimp with cocktail sauce, a baked potato with sour cream and butter, strawberry cheesecake, and sweet tea, end quote. Which isn't very important, but I was getting hungry while finishing up that writing this episode. Plus, he really likes his butter. He likes that dairy. Anywho, Danny got the final injection while singing creepy hymn songs to serenade the viewers on his way to hell. Like, just weird from start to finish. What a wild story. And honestly, I didn't remember much of any of that, if I'm being completely honest. It's just been so long since I've heard the tale of the Gainesville Ripper. I feel like all the other podcasts I started listening to did that 5 or 6 years ago, and I just haven't gone back to it. But I'm just glad that it worked out on this, quote, day in history, and it had something cool for us. Oh, also, side note, I cannot make any promises about this, but I'm hoping to start putting 2 episodes out each week for the most part. They're all like 20-ish minutes, and I think that's reasonable. I'm really starting to enjoy doing this. Some days are harder than the other, but that would be cool if I were able to. So, cheers to that. Like I said, no promises. Alrighty then. That's all I got for you. This has been Murder in the Morning. Have yourself a wonderful day. Bye-bye. And I love you. Say it back.